Hi, everyone. Welcome to our event today. We are going to get started in just a minute, but I'm just going to give a little bit of time to let some people trickle in. So, take some extra minutes to yourself before we kick things off. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If any of you attending want to comment into the chat and let us know where you're joining us today from, whether it's your morning, your evening, your afternoon, somewhere in between, middle of the night maybe. Anyway, we wanted to welcome you all to today's event, Purpose at Work, the missing piece to employee engagement. We know you could have been anywhere at this point, but you chose to spend an hour with us, so we appreciate that. We will kick off with some introductions. So I will start. I'm Amanda Schneiders, the Director of Content and Communications at Chronus, and I work to build the storytelling and impact stories around the work we do here with mentoring ERGs and purpose for some of our clients. And next, I'll get to our subject matter experts today. So first up is Colin Koach. He's an enterprise account manager here at Chronus. Colin is a leadership and organizational development professional with 15 plus years of experience. He's committed to helping individuals and organizations grow throughout life. Colin is a positive deviant, challenging people and organizations to think differently for the good of everyone. As an enterprise account manager for Chronus and previously Imperative, Colin has consulted Fortune 500 companies on how to leverage technology to activate and unleash the full potential of their people through mentoring, guided conversations, and purpose activation. And now our guest of the day, Britt Provost, Chief Human Resource Officer at Siteimprove. Britt has over 20 years of experience leading people, culture, and talent teams in global organizations of all sizes. Most of her work experience has had a consistent theme: high growth, global environments, experiencing rapid business change. She has demonstrated skill set working as a strategic business advisor with senior executive teams and board of directors across multiple organizational designs, public, private equity, and venture capital-backed companies. But at her core, Britt believes in the power of people. And with that, she's passionate about leading conversations on things like how to best develop skill and empower people leaders, what coaching works best to energize individual agency and career fulfillment and growth, and how to be part of the creation of a future of work that is inclusive, agile, and resilient. Now that you've learned a little bit about us today, we did want to kind of start off with a poll where we know a little bit about more what you're looking for from this webinar. So I wanted to kick this poll off, and it's, what do you hope to learn or gain in today's webinar? And there's a couple options here on the screen. Let us know, which of these might fulfill your interest today. There can be personal interest, there can be professional interests. If for whatever reason these options don't capture what you're looking for, feel free to tell us otherwise in the chat or add to it. See a handful of things coming in. All right. All right, looks like we're kind of all across the board on some of these. Lots of interest from the event today.
Yeah, wonderful.
Looks like maybe ways to level up our employee engagement strategy might be the leader by just a hair. But it sounds like you're also looking for ideas for scaling purpose activation, how to make the case for purpose, tips and strategies to use. So that's great. Thank you all so much. And now, before we jump into today's topic, I wanted to give you a chance to learn a little bit more about Chronus. We know that, for some of you, this might be your first interaction with Chronus, and you all might not be as familiar with what we do. And so I wanted to let you know that Chronus is a purpose-driven development platform that offers mentoring and ERG management software to help enterprise organizations combat the disengagement crisis that's happening in the workplace. We've helped large enterprises, government agencies, nonprofits, and academic institutions do this for the last 15 plus years with a platform that makes customers feel secure, supported, and ready to scale. If you'd like to learn more on how we can help your organization build a purposeful development strategy at any point during the webinar today, you can click that Get Demo button that's in the right-ish corner on your screen, and we will be connected that way. And then before we jump in, a few housekeeping tips. If you have any regular questions or anything that you want to ask the presenters, feel free to leave it either in the Q&A section, which is up to the right of your screen. You can ask a question right in there, or you can leave a question in the chat and we'll make sure it gets over to the Q&A. And if you have any messages one-on-one for our presenters or for me at any point in time, you can send a one-on-one message that way. And if you're not sure where to send something, go ahead and throw it in the chat. We'll make sure it gets to the right place. Now here's a quick look at our agenda for today. We're going to go through, obviously, welcome introductions, the human and business case for purpose, common myths of purpose and evolution of purpose, how to put it into practice, what you can do now, and then we'll do some audience Q&A. So that is what we're going to get into. And with that, I will probably kick it over to Colin to get us started.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda, and thanks everyone for being here this morning. This is a topic that I'm extremely passionate about and really has guided my work over the past decade plus, and really happy to have Britt here as well. I'm hopeful that what each of you can come out of today, regardless of the role that you play in your organization, is some way to bring more purpose and more meaning and intentionality into your workplace, whether that's for yourself, for your team, or for your organization. And we'll try to make sure that you get some tips, you get some foundational knowledge along the way to really build on. And extremely happy to have Britt here as well to help bring stories from the real world, really talking about how to lead in this way, how to bring purpose and connection to your organizations. But because this topic sometimes can become a little bit academic, I want to start really intentionally with asking us to connect internally with a sense of purpose and fulfillment. And so I'd invite everyone to reflect on this question. If you'd like to share a response in the chat, that's wonderful, but you don't have to. But think back. Think back to what was your earliest memory of seeing and believing that work could be about more than money, status, or recognition, that work could truly be about something that was meaningful from the inside out. So take a moment, think of that first memory. What comes to mind for you? Again, if you have something you'd like to share in the chat, that'd be wonderful. But I think connecting with this real sense of meaning and purpose is important to remember, that we have this sense, we have this internal compass with us all the time. And Britt, I'm curious, I teed you up a little bit for this. I'm curious if you have a story that comes to mind for this question.
Well, I probably have a couple, to be honest. I think part of, if you look at my career way back, I started it in nonprofit. And so I felt really strongly once I got out of school that nonprofit was the right place for me. And I'm so thankful for that experience. I think it taught me a lot. And I think it gave me a different frame, because I wasn't going straight into corporate structures or into, some of the adventures that I've had later on in my career. So I think that frame's always kind of given me a different perspective. And then I'll say the other thing that I think is kind of interesting, because it ties back to school for me. I always think of the work that I do in human resources as well-paid anthropology, cultural anthropology. And so I love that I have this opportunity in a lot of ways to look at cultural dynamics in the organization. And sometimes I think, we take our jobs way too seriously. We get way too cute about the things that we do every day being super serious. And I think if you think about that, I have another friend that always talks about how he thinks of his job as highly paid grad school. I think if we think about how we can be curious and learn in what we're doing, and have that focus more so than all of the other things, I think it can bring us back to some of the core of what drives us and what gives us purpose in the work we do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I see some stories coming into the chat as well. And these are stories that are important to connect us with, again, to remember that we have an innate sense of what's meaningful and purposeful to us. And a lot of what we're talking about in up-leveling our employee engagement strategy through purpose is bringing this to the forefront, elevating the level of awareness we have. And this has always been important, I would say, but has really, really become more important in the last few years. I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of sort of the purpose economy and purpose in the workplace. But what we know as of 2021, Edelman found that the number one reason that people left to take a new job was to find more fulfilling work. And I would say that many of us here are in the HR industry, that idea of attraction and retention of good folks is key. And so this being the number one reason is really important in time for us to raise the elevation and the importance of thinking about how are we ensuring that our folks are fulfilled in their work. And there are some common myths that I'm going to get to later, because many of the common objections are, well, you can only be fulfilled if you have a certain role, or if you have a certain pay level, or if you have certain levels of, interest or impact. What's important to know is that this is something that we can influence on all levels of the organization, and we're going to talk about how to do so. We know as well that even though that's the number one reason folks are leaving organizations, that close to 2/3 of folks are not fulfilled in their current roles. So if you think of that inside your team or your organization, now some organizations do a better job, and maybe your team is one of those lucky ones, but think about potentially 2/3 of the people in your organization considering going somewhere else, considering looking somewhere else, or staying and not bringing them full selves to work because of this. And we work with organizations around the world. And I want to tell a story of this woman here. It's not actually her, but let's call her Tina. We work with a large retail organization that you would have heard of. And they have something that they call the Purpose Network that they have partnered with Chronus and Imperative to bring to life. And the Purpose Network is something that is built around helping people connect with their own sense of purpose, and then to make purposeful connections and relationships across the organization. And we only found this out later when Tina, after participating in the program, had shared with us in a user interview that she was on the way out the door, right? She was leaving the organization, she was feeling depleted, and didn't see anything else for her to do at this organization. She went ahead and engaged in the Purpose Network, and what she discovered were that the insights she discovered from connecting with her own sense of purpose led to a new type of conversation with her manager, with her organization. And there was this real shift from not only having the insights personally, but being able to have open conversations with others, that she discovered that there was a win-win, right? There was an opportunity for her to continue to grow and to learn and to offer her gifts inside of the organization, and something that the organization deeply needed, right? So this is just one story, right? This is Tina, who had this turnaround from being able to connect with her own sense of purpose and see how it could come to life on a day-to-day basis inside of an organization. But it's emblematic, I think, potentially of these 67% of folks who might be inside of our organizations. And while that is just one story, Britt, I wanted to get your perspective as an HR leader of what stands out to you about that story, and how do some of the implications you think connect to some of the larger organizational goals, that you care about?
Oh, for sure. Look, I think that HR for a long time has been very cookie cutter in trying to approach learning and development, or whatever it is, that there's like one size that fits all. And understanding that purpose is actually what drives us, and it's very unique and it's very multifaceted, and having those conversations in a safe space organizationally with people that share those same ideas, I think it's really, really important. I've seen it obviously translate in the work that I've done using the purpose assessment, matching people up in organizations I've worked in. This is the second organization that I've used the Imperative product that's now part of Chronus. And this idea that you're making these connections with other humans, and you're talking about what's important to you, and you're able to make progress on, hey, putting those things into words, but also putting those things into goals, I think becomes a really important and powerful part of how we can motivate ourselves in the workplace. I think, again, it's really hard to turn this all over to HR to be responsible for, hey, let's do all these things to check the box. Instead, if we can be catalysts for connection and bringing people together so they can actually drive their careers, their interests, their purpose themselves, I think we do really good work within an organization. So, Colin, I don't know if that makes sense or if that ties in.
Yeah, I love that example. And I think you're right. We're going to touch more on this later. But there is this aspect that when we put people in the driver's seat of their own career, connecting first to what is intrinsically motivating to them, they
Yes.
can see so many more opportunities than we could ever sort of from the top down pick a perfect career path or whatnot. So it really allows people to be in the driver's seat. And I see this time and time again working with organizations that the results that people have when they're given the support to identify and then put their purpose into practice, it really, really has a ripple effect.
Yeah.
So I saw in the poll that many folks are here today curious about how do you make the business case for purpose. So maybe you all have already been following this work for a while. You've connected for yourself with the importance of connecting to purpose and fulfillment at work. But how do we make the business case? Well, I want to help you with a few things that we've seen of knowing that this is really a trend that we may have started talking about purpose 20 years ago. But we have reached a time in history where organizations who are not including purpose into their engagement, into their people strategies, are going to fall behind. And you may already be aware of this, and you're thinking about how do I make this business case internally? Well, Gallup, we know, is one of the most well-known and well-trusted organizations in terms of looking at employee engagement, and they've been studying this for decades now. I think we have all landed the plane on the fact that engagement matters. That when our people are engaged, not only do we get better outcomes for our people, but we get better outcomes for our business. And yet, over close to 30 years now, engagement has remained largely stagnant, right? So this is a big industry. People have put a lot of money and effort and time into it. And there are bright spots, right? There are things that we can do. But overall, we know that engagement has stayed roughly the same. And so the question becomes, what's the missing piece here? What can we do that is truly going to magnify things? And there is a growing body of evidence and research supporting the fact that purpose, the individual sense of purpose, is the missing link. And we've seen that employees in the modern era are starting to expect this, right? So if you're involved at all in talent acquisition or anything like that, we know that talented people know what to expect from the workplace. And we're starting to see organizations like Gallup, McKinsey, EY, others saying, starting with your sense of purpose is critical. If we're not connecting folks with a sense of purpose, they're going to be leaving the organizations. And that employees are now a primary stakeholder group that we need to be thinking about that employee value proposition. And it's not just that employees are wanting it. It's also that there's this growing body of research showing that it really drives profit in the bottom line as well. So what started in the early 2000s, maybe as a few obscure academics looking into, what is the role of purpose inside of organizations? We have now seen many of these big players, Harvard Business Review, BlackRock, Forbes, New York Times, everyone coming on to say, yes, purpose has been a missing link. And not only is it something that's important for our people, it's actually something that can drive profits for the organization. And even Gallup, right, the engagement organization that has been around and doing this for decades now, they have now included purpose as one of their top 5 core drivers of employee engagement. And we see this play out even further to really help you make, again, the business case on those leaders in your organization who might say, yeah, it's good for people, but what about the bottom line? We see that when organizations support their folks in really feeling connected in a meaningful way to the work that they're doing, that they're more committed, that we see better performance, that those folks stay longer. And then this is from EY, and I think is just so profound that as a company, that those who are really supportive of their folks finding meaning, purpose, and fulfillment in their work outperform their peers by 10 times on the S&P 500, right? So this is so critical. It's so powerful. And I think it's important to think about the reason why this is true. At a baseline level, it's because when we tap into folks' intrinsic motivation, and that's what we're doing when we're talking about what is meaningful and fulfilling for each individual, it's self-reinforcing. So the more we connect with that sense of purpose, the more we bring it out. It's renewable in the sense, again, that the more we invest in it, it's almost like a muscle. The stronger it gets, the more it can come out. And we're all looking for renewable resources inside of organizations, right? And it's within our control. No matter the market conditions, no matter the product that's coming out, no matter the feedback that we're getting from our customers, the ability to connect on a daily basis with what's meaningful and fulfilling to us is within our control, and there's something that we can do about it. Now, what can happen though, and I'd be curious, I have another little poll for you that I think Amanda is going to help with. I'll set this up. But there are 2 really important components when we think about an overall strategy that's going to support a culture of purpose and ownership. One is the company's purpose, right? What is our reason for existing beyond profit? The other part is individual purpose. What are my unique drivers of daily meaning and fulfillment? How do I drive meaning? How do I solve problems? How do I share my gifts and contribute? These two factors really need to come together in a way to activate purpose across an organization. And that's ultimately what Chronus does. We really try to find that sweet spot by unlocking awareness for individuals of their purpose and then connecting it to the organizational purpose. But before I go a little bit farther, I'd be curious, just because of the wisdom and the experience in the room, with this little poll, in your experience and what you've seen in the world, have you seen more focus on company purpose or more focus on individual purpose in your experience and what you've seen? Take a second to respond to the poll here if you're willing. Okay, so I had a feeling that this might be the direction it would go. So please keep those coming in. But what we see initially, which is also what I have seen in the world and kind of what I've seen in the marketplace, is that by and large, there has been a large movement over the past couple decades to think about company purpose, right? The Patagonias of the world who really have become known for contributing to something larger. And it's not at all to say that's not important, right? We're in support of that. But if we go back to this slide, looking at these two elements of really where it comes to life. And we would actually recommend that folks start with the sense of individual purpose, because what we have found is that then that allows people to naturally connect in an authentic way to their company purpose. Whereas what can happen if company purpose is led a little bit too strongly and from a sort of what can feel like a marketing perspective out in the market, is if the public perception of your company, your organization, your team is all about purpose, but the individuals aren't feeling it, aren't feeling connected, it creates this tension that comes out, right? And so we know that this has been an area that has to some degree been neglected. Maybe it has felt like we haven't had enough tools to support this, but this is sort of our thesis and encouragement to you all is, yes, keep that company purpose going, but make sure that the support of individual purpose and fulfillment is there, and trust that the sort of the missing link will come together in the middle. And the ways that you can really do this, which we'll talk a lot more later about practical ideas, but has to do with raising people's awareness of what gives them purpose and fulfillment, and then forming purposeful connections, whether they be mentoring relationships, manager to direct one-on-ones, peer-to-peer, but relationships is really how this comes to life. And so I wanted to give you the voice of one of our partners we've actually been working with for many years. This is a large consulting firm, also one that you would have heard of. And they have a purpose-based mentoring program. And so this is actually the mentor sharing that my mentor and my mentee and I talked about finding her purpose, building relationships and being mindful about her work in order to find where she belongs in the firm. We made some good headway sorting out what she aspires to become and what isn't working for her. And then I think this is the key part. My mentee and I both left feeling reinvigorated and more connected to the firm and to each other, right? So in this one experience, we have created an opportunity where people are more connected to each other, they're more energized, they have more clarity on how they contribute, and they feel more connected to the organization at large. And again, this is only one example, but I think that we really learn through stories, and we can start to think to ourselves, gosh, what if this was happening at scale across the organization? So Britt, I want to come back to you for a second. I've laid out the whole business case, and I want to say that you were ahead of the curve on bringing purpose, connection, fulfillment as part of your holistic people strategy. And I'm curious for you, what's the most compelling aspect of the business case for purpose in your perspective, and what really led you to commit to it as part of your people strategy?
It's interesting. I've spent a lot of time in HR and of all the programs that I've ever brought into an organization, a peer-to-peer connection. So we're not yet doing mentoring through Chronus, but we've been really focused on this peer-to-peer connection based on purpose in the two organizations that I've worked with the program. And it's been really interesting because those connections, those matchups where you do a purpose assessment and get two people together and have conversations over a period of time, that relationship, that partnership, that set of sparks that get created working through those things, it's really powerful. And even if you're not formally continuing with that connection, those partners still call each other because they've got something shared in common. Obviously, you know, they got matched up based on shared interest and purpose. And let's be honest, being in organizations can be a little bit lonely. And so this idea that you are building those relationships, and it's real, and you're curious about each other and all those things, it becomes really, really powerful. And I'll tell you, like, you know, to get funding and to go through all these things with this program becomes easy when you have people talking about it when you're not talking about it. So when it's less of a, hey, this is an HR check the box, and more so that you've got an ongoing history of people continuing to participate, and you've got people talking about those relationships in powerful ways, and people, when they're talking to their people leader about how this is the best investment they can make with their time, you just really realize that making connections within your organizational community is probably one of the best things you can do.
Yeah. And so in a way, you're also talking about making sure that the context or the systems in place where that feedback bubbles up and that various business leaders are hearing about it, not just from you as an HR initiative, but you're ensuring that the benefits are sort of infused into the daily work and coming up in different ways as well.
Absolutely. The way I got my first program funded was that it continued to come up through the talent review, where we were talking to senior leadership about how we were supporting people that we wanted to make a little bit more of an investment in. And so thinking about a way to get those feedback loops kind of sorted back, so that you get that support funding wise, I think is a really important thing to think about.
Yeah, wonderful. So this is an area, sort of this case around purpose, again, shifting from what maybe was sort of only for innovators a couple of decades ago to now really becoming something that is identified as a core aspect of a people priority, as something that Chronus is going to be and has been continuously investing in. And actually, this is where we actually have this really nice connection, because Chronus recently, as an investment in this, acquired Imperative, the company that I have been working for and that has really been a leader in purpose activation in the marketplace for over a decade now. And it's to really bring and infuse this idea and the thought leadership into everything that we do. And Imperative as an organization, just so you have a sense of some of the work that we're sharing here and that is being built into everything that we're doing, goes all the way back to this book in 2013 that was written by the then founder of Imperative, The Purpose Economy, and Aaron Hurst. And what he laid out was really an understanding that we are entering, and I would say since COVID, we've entered it even farther, a new economic era, an economic era driven by purpose, meaning, and fulfillment, in the sense that that's what we want, need, and expect from our work, from our recreation, from our time. And so we went on from there to really understand, well, that's great, but what are the key drivers of purpose and fulfillment? And so that was the work over the next few years with various different research partners to understand how can we decode in a simple, understandable way where people derive their purpose and meaning. And so that led to the creation of a purpose profile, which Chronus now has and is making available to all of our partners and customers, and then ultimately bringing that to life through guided conversations, mentoring conversations, peer-to-peer conversations. And what I think is important to talk about at this phase is many of the myths that can come up when we talk about purpose. So that's what we were able to expose and understand going through this experience, is that there are some beliefs that can come up and get in the way of thinking that this is possible. And maybe you yourself have thought of one of these, but there are a few. So one of the big objections that we've heard and we've talked about is that, well, purpose is all about a cause, right? I have to work in activism, or I have to work for some big cause that I believe in that I have to find. And what we know is that purpose is available, is accessible in every type of role, every type of job. And it's also can be blocked from any type of role. So take of something, thinking that we might obviously think of having a cause, like working in medicine or as a doctor. There are plenty of doctors, people who work in medicine, that are not fulfilled, right? But there are plenty who are. There are also plenty of people who work in jobs that we might consider challenging, tedious, who find a huge sense of purpose. So it's not about finding a particular cause. It's also not about having a revelation. It's not about going and sitting on top of a mountain and receiving our life purpose in a light bulb moment. Purpose is actually a daily practice. It's something that we can find and we can create in all of our jobs, and that it's not a luxury. right? This is not something that when we get to experience when we've reached a certain level of income or a certain level of stage of life or anything like that. Purpose is not a luxury. It's something that we all can have the ability to, and actually have an innate ability to bring into our work. And so that's what bringing this into our people engagement strategies is, to dispel some of these myths and to bring to light what is possible. So what is purpose in terms of how we think about it and how we talk about it? Well, one, it's an inherent part of being human, right? So if we actually just get out of the way, we'll know that we are meaning makers, right? We make meaning from all of our experience, and it's possible in all jobs. There's some really great stories of studies where they'll examine like 2 different hospital systems and look at some of the orderlies and people who are doing relatively challenging, relatively what you might assume are sort of meaningless tasks. But they find these different cultures where in the organizations where they have focused on some of the key areas that I'm going to share in the next few slides, they experience profound levels of meaning, right? And it creates an internal compass for us, which again is something critical when we have large distributed organizations. We need individuals who are navigating themselves, who they can be ability to have and say, what is my highest contribution to the goals of the organization through my work? And our purpose serves as that internal compass. It's experienced in many ways throughout life. So you probably have already experienced this. What was important, meaningful to you, what was fulfilling to you in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, it shifts. It changes based on our stage of life, based on our role. But what's critical is that purpose is a source of daily energy, motivation, and creativity. When we tap into that sense of what's meaningful and fulfilling for us, it fills us up from the inside out. And again, when we can get that going, and importantly, when we can remove any practices inside of our organization that might be inhibiting that or cutting that out, that is where there's really this, like I mentioned before, sort of a butterfly effect that starts to happen. And so here's what we've discovered. If you're going to remember one thing from this presentation, the next few slides would be it. I remember learning about this, and it has stuck with me ever since, whether you're an individual, leading a team, or leading an entire organization. What we did is go and look at people who were highly fulfilled in their work. So we looked for the bright spots. Who were the people that had purpose, meaning, and fulfillment in their work? And what was going right for them? What did they have in common? And we found 3 really simple, clear, but powerful elements that are part of allowing folks to be fulfilled and to have purpose in their life. So the first one was about relationships. And this is not just how many relationships. How purpose came to life through relationships was the depth and the meaning of connections. So genuinely getting to know other people and having them get to know you, having them be mutually beneficial, where we're trying to support each other, we're bringing our best to the relationship, and also critically that we're forming connections across organizations outside of boundaries that we might normally get stuck within. So purpose in relationships and having time and space to understand how our purpose is coming to life was critical among these folks. Second among these folks was that the way that they were making impact, the kind of impact they were making and how they saw it was critical in fulfilling their purpose. So folks who were highly fulfilled were regularly making an impact on something that mattered to them, and they had visibility. They could see that impact. And this is something that can be difficult because it's those 2 parts, right? It's not only making an impact, but it's being able to see it. And oftentimes inside of organizations, whether you're a manager or a team leader, it is helping those folks see the impact that they're making that is so critical. And lastly, purpose showed up through growth, experiencing our own personal and professional growth. So people who were highly fulfilled said, yes, I understand and have opportunities and experience my own growth regularly. That's because we want to have a sense that we're in movement, right? So this is a really simple framework. We call it RIG, but it really is so easy to remember, so easy to put into practice that if we support all 3 of these elements on a regular basis for our folks, there is a high likelihood that they're going to be experiencing fulfillment, not only in their work, but in their life. So meaningful relationships, making an impact on something that matters to us, and having a sense of personal and professional growth. RIG. So to help that settle in a little bit, and so that you can see sort of the immediate practicality of this, I'd like to do one more poll. You probably were already naturally thinking about this as I was sharing examples, but I'd like you to consider for yourself right now, wherever you are in your work, in your life, which of these 3 elements, relationships, impact, or growth, would you benefit most personally from strengthening at this time in your life? Okay, so take a second. If you're willing to answer the poll, that'd be great. So where would you benefit most from focusing? Relationships, impact, growth, or you can choose all of the above if you'd like. I'll give you a second as these come in. Okay, so we've got a pretty good split, which is actually something that we expect, that is fairly common. And what you can identify even in just thinking about that, you probably are also sensing that there's some ideas of what might I do about that? Who might I connect with? What source of work right now is most impactful? Where do I want to grow? Who could I connect with to support that growth? So this reflection has a natural ability to help us identify, again, raise the level of awareness, and then activate on what we can do. I'm going to come back to this a little bit later when we talk about some more practical strategies that you can bring into your organization. But the biggest myth around purpose overall, and this was, again, astonishing when I found this, and I think this is what takes this from being a work strategy to really just a human being who lives on planet Earth life strategy. The biggest myth was that we can be fulfilled outside of work and we don't have to worry about it at work. And what we found is that is just almost impossible. Only 1% of people who weren't fulfilled in their work were fulfilled in their life overall. And we can think about why this might be, because we spend so much time, so much energy, so much investment at work that if we're not deriving purpose, meaning, and fulfillment there's just not enough time and space in the rest of our day to do so. So again, supporting people's connection to these areas, their relationship, their impact and growth, it's not just about supporting your business, but there really is this ripple effect that then goes out into our communities across the world and really has a broader impact as well. And sadly, and I want to come back to you, Britt, here in a second, but McKinsey has done some work in trying to understand this gap that exists inside of organizations. So while we know this is so important, there's actually this pretty stark gap existing in terms of levels in the organization. So what this is showing here, it's a little bit small on the left, is that senior leaders and executives inside of organizations, 85% of them feel like, yeah, I can experience purpose in my day-to-day work. However, in the sort of frontline managers and frontline workers inside of an organization, 85% of them are either unsure or disagree about whether they can experience purpose in their day-to-day work. So there is so much potential here because we know it is possible. We know that by raising people's level of awareness, by supporting their relationships, impact, and growth, we can bring this to life. But this gap that exists, again, creates an issue. And Britt, I hear your perspective and just curious, what do you think, and I'm asking you to speculate here a little bit, but what do you think underlies this gap? You know, what is it that allows executives and senior leaders to feel like they can experience their purpose where maybe the majority can't? And what are the implications of that? Like, what are we supposed to do about that gap?
Yeah, I think this ties back to agency in a lot of ways. I think people don't feel like they have agency to ask for what's important, or they don't create space for this time to kind of actualize it. Colin, when I think about every time you and I kick off a session where we're doing another group of people coming together to do a peer-to-peer matchup, right? We always talk about, hey, this is for your development. Make time, make space, give energy. I think for a lot of folks that are just trying to get through day to day, it's really hard to make that time and space and energy and create energy about figuring out what purpose is. I think I saw a comment actually in the chat, I think that also just talked about the fact it's just really hard. Where do people start? And so I don't know that we give people the guidebook to talk about how to get agency. Things like, you know, how do I get curious about things? What questions should I ask? I think it's the biggest question that, you know, throughout my entire career, people have asked me, how do I get a mentor? We don't give people a lot of guidance about how to get connected, how to think about this, where to get started. And I think if organizations would get smart about it and give people the guidebook, give them the space, we'd probably have different numbers there. Let me also say that, you know, you talked about engagement when you started, and organizations have been absolutely kind of relentless in terms of looking at engagement. I think we might be wrong. I think there's a piece in engagement about being proud for working for the company. But I also think we should be asking about people's pride in purpose. So I think we're missing some of the words and some of the ways to actually understand how people are doing.
Yes.
Because we're so focused on that idea of traditional engagement.
Yes.
So I don't know if that helps, but that's one person's perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to actually come back to that in some of our sort of practical suggestions that we'll leave folks with as well. And you mentioned exactly, which is we've seen in our research as well, is that a first step is simply raising people's awareness. And there are lots of ways we can do this by helping to ask people questions at onboarding, right? Think in onboarding how much we talk about the company's purpose and mission and vision and values. But in your onboarding experience, are you asking folks about their values? Are you asking folks about what's been fulfilling for them, what gives them a sense of pride, what they hope to contribute? When we ask people and we raise the level of awareness, what we've seen is that if people just have awareness about what brings them purpose and fulfillment, there's a 63% chance that they will be fulfilled. Whereas if we don't, only 17% chance. You also mentioned, and I think apparently there's been some things in the chat of, well, gosh, where do we get started? Well, that's what actually led to the creation of the purpose profile. So it's the one of a kind, it's the only one that we're aware of, and we really decoded. It's a validated assessment that helps people understand what is my purpose? What are my drivers of motivation and fulfillment? And so what it helps people understand in a very simple way is, who do I want to impact, right? Some people are much more motivated by impacting society at large, where other people really want to see and feel their impact on one individual. And it's not that we don't care about all these things, but it's about each of us uniquely is motivated and energized by an impact at different level. Why do we want to make an impact? What are some of the core beliefs we have about the world that we want to see, that we want to be a part of, and that contributing to that is motivating for us? And the last aspect of the purpose profile for us is that we call it the craft driver, which is, how do you solve problems? What are your superpowers? How do you go about this? And it's the combination of these three things that allows us to basically show people, what's your archetype? Like, what's your purpose type? So here's the empowerer. We've got an example of all these different ones. But what's so critical here, whether you use a purpose profile like ours or whether you're doing it on your own, is giving people a language. When we have a language and ability to talk about something, it allows us to then put it into action. It allows us to reflect on it. It allows us to ask other people about it. So whether you are interested in learning about the Chronus purpose profile or whether you're doing it on your own, it's critical because it's the starting point to this sort of virtuous cycle of fulfillment. And this is the last sort of broad concept that I want to introduce. And the details are less important than understanding that there is this positive flywheel that we're trying to create. This is from some research we did with PwC a number of years ago around how to make work more meaningful. And it all starts, again, at the top you see up there, with raising people's level of awareness about their own purpose and taking some ownership. What's fulfilling for me? Then the key link, right, is helping people, as you were talking about, Britt, bring that into their day-to-day work. How do I put that into practice? How do I make that work? And so what we've seen is that simple framework of relationships, impact, and growth is a really memorable way and a simple way for people to bring that to life. As people then experience purpose in their relationships, impact, and growth, it triggers our brain to release oxytocin, dopamine. We get these really good feelings, and that creates the sense of fulfillment. So fulfillment comes from when we're working in alignment with our purpose, offering our best. It leads to this feeling of fulfillment, which is then reinforcing, right? So it feeds back into our desire to more deeply understand our purpose. So remember when I said that it's not a revelation? This is not something that happens all at once. It's a journey. It's a continuous practice of connecting with what's meaningful, putting it into practice in our day-to-day, and then reinforcing that loop. And so that's where we at Chronus have really gone on to build more of an infrastructure to think about, well, how do I bring this to scale inside of an organization? And I think whether you decide to work with a vendor like us or whether you're building your own strategies, these principles are applicable and similar in the same sense. So again, having folks raise their level of awareness about their sense of purpose and what gives them fulfillment, forming connections, critical link. I like this phrase I learned a long time ago, which development is a team sport. In isolation, it is very hard for us as human beings to learn and grow. So we need to form those purposeful connections and then ideally engage in conversations. So as human beings, we need the ability to reflect, to think through things, and to learn in order to make sense of our experiences. And in the day-to-day world, which you all know, our time to slow down and reflect is really squeezed upon. So that's what, as organizations, we can really protect that time and space. Sometimes bringing some infrastructure or a program to it really helps to give it some validity. But even if you're a team leader, making sure that there is time and space to engage in purposeful conversations. And then ultimately, analyzing impact and really thinking about how are we seeing results come through and how can we feed that back into what we're doing. So Britt, I want to bring up from your current organization, our partnership together, Siteimprove. There's a quote from one of your participants that I loved. It's kind of speaking to this point. They just said, "It's so nice to meet a new face at Siteimprove. Our shared values make me confident that Siteimprove is hiring people with substance and the desire to build a culture of purpose and belonging." So this is just one quote, and I do want to hear your perspective on what's it like for you just knowing inside of your organization that these kinds of connections are happening. But I also want to step back and see if you're kind of willing to just share the story with us. Anything else you'd want to add on how you arrived at wanting to bring purpose and connection into your people's strategies, sort of what you were wanting to solve, and ultimately the results you've seen.
Yeah, well, that's a lot. So I'll try and do it efficiently. But what I would just say is I'm just really proud of being a partner with this work. I think it's been a journey for me. I don't know that when I began the journey working with Imperative, now Chronus, on purpose, that I was probably as articulate of saying that what I was bringing into the organization was purpose. What I was trying to solve was thinking about how to start giving people experiences and making connections. And I think, HR's done some damage in terms of like how we walk in the world because we've been so focused on forms and filling out things and, not necessarily making connections or having conversations. And so I think as I began the journey and really understood, hey, how does the match happen? How do you start having guided conversations? And how do you have this outcome of making people feel like they're coming across the organization in different ways is incredibly powerful. So I don't think I had a lot of like deep thoughts as I was going in. I was trying some things out to see if they worked. And I think what was really just spectacular for me is the power of conversation, power of connection, and giving people places where they can have a shared experience, I think is really, really important. I think we all know, or we take for granted, especially post-COVID, how lonely the world is. And, focusing on just trying to get through our work and everything else without having that time and reflection to figure out who we want to be, how we want to grow, the impact we want to have in the organization. A lot of times we just don't think about that. And so walking through in this partnership, it's been really interesting to see, again, those relationships that we're creating in an organization that just makes me happy. Conversations that we're having in an organization that just make me happy. And then the bigger, broader business impact of making people feel like they want to stay and be connected and be part of an organization because we create this space. And because they, more so than the company, they have these friends, colleagues, inspiring people that they're working with day to day that motivate them to want to be in the organization. And when they have challenging days that are not part of the program, the person they call is usually their purpose partner because they have a shared connection. Yeah. So do I feel like I'm building relationships through this facilitation? Yes. Does that value me in a really powerful and practical way in the organization? Yes. And it's been interesting because the two companies I've worked with have been one that's very US focused, one that is very dynamic in terms of being outside of US. So US, Danish, British, and just different conversations that have happened. And in both cases, it's done different things for the organization to be focused on onboarding or M&A activity. Or, in this one, we've been just really focused on getting people to know each other, especially across different cultural lines. Yeah. But in all of those cases, it's added effectiveness to the organization. And I just think there's so many different business cases, with people leaders or onboarding or other things that we're going to start trying that just, again, create community. And I don't know many tools that I've worked with as a HR leader that can help me create community. Yeah.
Love that. Well, I do think you were ahead of the curve and it's been a wonderful partnership. We want to make sure to get into some Q&A. I have a few practical tips that you may be thinking of that I want to leave folks with, but then start thinking of questions that you might have. Amanda's going to come in here to kind of help us wrap up and get into some Q&A. But this is important to us, as we talked about. This matters for the world. So whether you want to work with Chronus on anything or not, we wanted you to have some ideas of whether you're a manager, an individual, again, a team or organizational leader, how can you start bringing purpose to life? So a couple of simple ideas across different areas. One is start bringing purpose questions into your one-on-ones and your team meetings. This can be as simple as, what has been most energizing or meaningful for you this week? You'll find your own, but again, that's just helping to raise the level of awareness. You can also introduce, as we've talked about a couple times, purpose discovery into your onboarding or new hire experience. So again, when you're talking about the values and purpose of the company, talk about the values and purpose of your individuals as well. Support them, whether it's with a purpose profile or assessment or a series of intentional questions and conversation with others. You can integrate the RIG framework, relationships, impact, and growth, into development programs for leadership development. You could even incorporate it into performance reviews, career planning, goal stages, all those different types of things. That's something that we have actually practiced for many years in our organization, is reflecting on those areas of RIG at annual reviews and setting goals for the year ahead as well. A few more as we get, again, into different levels of influence you might have in the organization. One is just connecting people beyond their regular environments and helping them build real relationships. So you know many people, and you can do a great service by connecting people in an intentional way outside of their normal boundaries. And if you've got even bigger purview and capacity than that, start or broaden a purpose-driven connection program. So whether that's mentoring, ERGs, peer-to-peer, purpose network, you can bring this to scale. And that's what's so powerful about it, is by helping people have awareness and then have purposeful connections, you can really bring this to scale. And then lastly, we talked about on the employee engagement strategy, many of us have surveys and different types of things, but make sure that you're gauging connection to individual and organizational purpose in your engagement surveys with a question about, the purpose of my organization matters to me, but also I find purpose in my day-to-day work that matters to me. Again, that missing link will really help. So if you've got more questions, more ideas, we definitely want to hear about those. I want to pass it over to Amanda at this point to help us bring us into some Q&A. But thank you all so much. And please feel free to keep the questions coming and the conversation going.
Thank you, Colin, for all the great information today. We really do appreciate it. As Colin said, we do want to get into Q&A very quickly. I know we're running short on time, and we want to make sure if you have any questions that have been coming up, please let us know. Either drop them in the chat, put them in the Q&A real quick. And while we give you a chance to do that, we just wanted to kind of, sum up with, again, kind of what Chronus is and what we're focused on as an organization. So at Chronus, we believe that organizations only reach their greatest potential when their people do. And so we do this by helping organizations create connected workplaces where people thrive. Ultimately, as Colin was talking about today, we put organizations in the driver's seat. We allow them to kind of fuel that employee-driven development. And we do this by centering on purpose. So in our approach, purpose, this kind of purpose-driven development is fueled by the key aspects that Colin was already talking about: the relationships, the impact, and the growth. And with purpose at the core, we deliver this approach through a variety of solutions like mentoring, employee resource groups, onboarding programs, purpose conversations, sponsorship programs, and more. So whether we're, giving people a purpose assessment at the very beginning and then matching them in a mentoring program, kind of on this purpose enhanced matching, and then guiding them through these purpose conversations, and ultimately seeing the impact of purpose on these relationships as we see people develop in an organization, or we're looking at like we said, a sponsorship program or an onboarding program. This is kind of Chronus's ultimate focus. Now we do want to get to Q&A. So like I said, any questions that have been burning or building up, throughout the conversation, please drop it in the chat or into our Q&A piece. Ultimately, I think there was a discussion going on in the chat, like how do organizations think about purpose? Do you think about it from an individual standpoint and then an organizational, or organizational and boil down to an individual one? I know, Colin, you were talking about this a little bit earlier, but I was wondering if you could kind of come back to this a bit and kind of say, can you give your approach on is it best to instill it from the individual side or from the organizational side? Can you do both at the same time? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think both are critical. But honestly, if we look at our own experience, and many of the folks in this webinar will be familiar with principles of change management and all that kind of stuff. It's the human being who you're asking to show up to work, to contribute, to do something. And so for me, it is primary, or at least it's essential to make sure that we're doing it. I think that's why I've put so much of a focus on it, because I think it's been left behind. So corporate and organizational purpose is extremely important. But what I have found is that when we support individuals in finding and having encouragement and agency, as Britt was talking about, to express that in contribution to the organization, they will naturally connect with, find, and honestly probably propel and further the corporate purpose as well. So both are critical, but I think it's been a missing link, and that's why I would encourage us to really think about what are we doing to support the individual.
And Colin, can I say one more thing? Please. I think there's an interim piece in between there. There's company, there's individual, and there's the community that gets created by the employees that the company doesn't actually manage. I mean, that's where, you always talk about, where does culture come in? Well, it's in this part here. Yeah, the leaders and others are going to push things down, and that makes sense. But in between all that is what matters. And I think when you do this by activating individual interest, you're creating community.
I love that.
Yeah. Another question that we've had come in is also, when we're thinking about, a purpose assessment or thinking about purpose, how is it different than other assessments or other types of things that organizations may already have in their organization, whether it's a strengths finder or something like that? How does purpose, is it set apart? Is it different? Is it additive to it? How are we thinking about it?
Yeah. Britt, I saw some head movement from you. Did you want to speak to that?
Well, I mean, I think there's a difference between personality assessment and understanding kind of where you fit in the world in terms of style and communication and other things. This is activated, I think, entirely on how you look at purpose. That's been my experience with it. Colin, I don't know if I'm addressing it properly.
Yeah, and we've got a resource that can help with this, but it's that internal motivation. Where does it come from for me? So many of those assessments will talk about your personality or your communication style or your strengths, and those are useful, right? They're still raising awareness, but they're not getting to the level of what is driving me from the inside out. What is important to me? What matters to me? And again, we find that once people start having that language as a starting point in, gosh, my impact driver, where am I most motivated to make an impact? Then they start to see the opportunities and build on it for themselves. So that's what, again, is really unique about purpose in particular, and why I think it's additive. It just goes to that next level deeper, that again connects people to what is my internal compass that I can use, as opposed to just what's my personality or how do I communicate with others.
No, I think that's great. It's kind of a different and yet how those things kind of work together ultimately to make employees productive in the workplace.
Yeah.
I know that you gave some strategies here at the end really quick, and I just wanted to see if there were anything from the audience members, were there any of these that stuck out to you right away where you're like, oh, we want to start doing that tomorrow, or I'm going to take that back to my team, next week or in our next town hall? Anything that kind of stood out to you around these ideas where you thought that could be a good starting point for us? Feel free to, say so in the chat, or which one maybe stuck out. But Britt, Colin, I don't know if from your personal perspective, if someone was getting started in a kind of very organic way, which one might be a good starting place?
I have a comment if it's relevant. It's kind of embedded in here, but one of the things I do with my team, because it just is sanity for me, is I ask every quarter, at the beginning of the quarter and the end of the quarter, talk to me about the 3 goals that you've got. Let's share them as a team that aren't necessarily part of, your day-to-day job. What's one thing that you are absolutely focused on that thrills you from a development perspective? That is your purpose. That's what you're telling me that you want to grow and do. And what are the asks that you have of your team members to help support you in all this? And we do that in kind of a shared conversation. It's deeply insightful for me because I know where people are focused. I know what's important to them in terms of how they're growing, which kind of ties back to purpose. And I also think there's that community piece of this, which is, how do you help me grow? And that ask that you're making of your organization. So I think it's sort of like, it's a combination of like thinking about how to put that in your one-on-ones, but also how to do some purpose discovery in a way that maybe isn't so heavy-handed and so complicated. If you give people too much time to think or make it too complicated, they don't quite know how to respond. If you keep it super simple, you can start to get to a conversation and open the door. So that works pretty well.
Nothing to add there. Love that.
Thanks, Britt.
Feel it with pride.
I know we're getting ready to wrap up, and if there's any other questions that kind of come in right here at the end, I'm happy to pass them along to our experts and get a little feedback for you all personally so that we don't miss anything. But I think there's been some great insights shared, and we really appreciate Colin and Britt, you being here today and kind of taking us through. Purpose can be a big thing. It can feel squishy at times, but also like aspirational and motivational. So it's great to kind of break it down and get a better sense of what it really means on the individual and organizational level and why it's so important. I have LinkedIn, for Britt and Colin here. If you want to reach out to them, feel free. If you've got additional questions, you want to reach directly out to them, we certainly welcome that. If you have a question for Chronus, you can reach out to moreinfo@chronus.com, or like we said, click the Get Demo button if you want to learn more about how we might be able to help build a purpose-driven strategy in your organization. But thank you all so much for being here today. We really do appreciate it. And if you have any more questions, we're only a click away digitally. And thank you, Britt and Colin, for everything you had to share.
Thank you both. Britt, thanks so much for doing this. It's been a joy.
Thank you all, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Take care.
Bye.